lately we've been talking a lot on the faculty about inequality. And you could, I think, legitimately say that inequality is a problem. But it might be more helpful in many contexts to say, not the word inequality, but some of the things that you really mean that are behind the veil of inequality. People are poor and their safety net is frayed and you want to help them. People are rich and they're greedy and badly behaved. The middle class is getting crunched. Okay? Or the very rich have too much political power in many ways. All these are perhaps indirectly or directly related to sort of inequality, but they're not quite the same thing.
Well, and also inequality might mean that some people aren't getting the opportunities that they should have.
That
So
too.
it might be that society is wasting the talent of a lot of people who, because they're not well off, can't get to
Right.
good schools and higher education
Right.
and so forth. So
Right.
it's moving beyond the notion that inequality per se is the problem and saying, what is it about inequality that produces difficulties that
Right.
we want to remedy?
And you're implying very strongly another point too, which is that inequality of what? Of incomes, of wealth. The American way is inequality of opportunity should be removed. People deserve opportunities. Inequality may also not be quite the right way to frame the opportunity problem. Maybe it's, we don't so much care about the equality of opportunities, but it's adequacy of opportunities for a large segment of the population, you know. Forget inequality, you know, give them something that'll do.
Right. And also it's the fact that inequality is a funny thing in that some inequality is probably a good thing because it gives people goals to shoot for. It only becomes really problematic when it becomes the case that only a very small group of people can get to the top and lots of folks who actually maybe have the skills and abilities don't have those possibilities.
Yeah, I'd like to be dean, but there's somebody, you know,
Somebody else is
inequality problem is in my way. you know.
Yes, well, so another problem with the problem definition is that clients, you hinted at it before, but you have different kinds of clients. Sometimes it's going to be a government, sometimes a nonprofit organization, sometimes even a private sector company. So for example, a private sector company, it might be lovely if they said to themselves, we've got to solve the problem of poverty, but it's not clear that a private sector company should be solving that problem. Maybe that's a problem for government.
Right.
And vice versa. There may be problems the government should say, private sector can do this better than we can do this.
Yeah, one of the classic things is, you know, and I didn't discover this until I was on the faculty here. Should cities be in the wealth or income redistribution business? Mm-hmm. You know, historically, the public finance wisdom from the economists is probably not, because people can move. And that's, so you need to have a redistributive engine that's got more traction than a local government. Well, that's, you know, a piece of ancient wisdom. It may still be true, but maybe not quite as much in some ways. Yeah.
But sometimes you might actually even want to say to your client, it's true you're not going to solve this problem. I think of the fact that my wife worked for many years trying to get smoking ordinances, anti-smoking ordinances in local communities. Well, it was pretty clear that one local community was not going to solve the smoking problem in America, but nevertheless this strategy actually turned out to be pretty successful. And why? How does that work, that kind of mechanism?
Well, you know, I have something that underlines it even better than the point you're making with the anti-smoking, which I completely agree with, which is, say some city decides that it's got to do something about global warming and climate change, okay? So they call upon you as a policy analyst to tell them what to do, and they define the problem as slowing down or preventing climate change, okay? Now, the truth is they're not. You know, by themselves, it's about zero contribution to the entire global effort. However, if you look at this as a kind of participation in a larger campaign, and their work has some kind of encouragement or demonstration or proof of possibility effect on all the other agencies of government, local, state, national, and international, well, then that's more interesting. However, if now your job is to help them, find what to do, you have to think about this, and the criteria by which to judge outcomes are not just helping to prevent climate change, it's also what's politically visible and persuasive. And that's something that you should think about in the beginning all the way through the design of the analysis.
So in that case, the problem is not just global climate change, because you're not going to solve that problem, but the problem is how can we make a contribution to a movement
Right.
that might have some impact ultimately on global climate
Exactly.
change, which is similar to the anti-smoking regulations, that one city does it, another city says, gee, they did it, and it turns out the people who go to restaurants are actually happier because they don't have to contend
Right.
with smoke.
The smoking thing has a major advantage, which is that every time you make a little dent, it's not only part of the campaign, you're actually helping all those people who
in the
would have been
community.
exposed.
Yep, yep.
Or-
And so
or
it's got a bigger contribution, at least in that locality,
Yeah.
in the climate change issue, because the trouble is,
It's nice to find things like that.
yes, so again, thinking about what the problem is and making sure you've defined it clearly can be really, really important.
Yes.
So that's the end of our section on problem definition, and we'll go to the next one in a moment.